Good morning, everyone. I'm Josette Sheeran. I'm president and CEO of the Asia Society. I have to tell you how deeply impressed I am that 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, 8:30 a.m. in New York City, we have a full house. Obviously, this is a hot topic and a hot report that's being released today. So today we are launching a landmark report called Philanthropy in China. I will hold it up here. And this has been produced by the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, or AVPN, and supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. This report reveals how China is growing into a powerhouse for domestic and international development, driven largely by their exceptionally growth of their private sector, now comprising over half of the GDP of China, and a new, and shall we say, first generation of wealth. A quarter of a century ago, China was the biggest aid recipient of an institution I ran called the United Nations World Food Program. We've seen this transformation, but just remembering that and seeing today that China's become a force that has lifted more people out of poverty than most of human history combined. And the question has been, will this new generation of billionaires and wealth in China turn into a generation of philanthropists and give back at scale to create not only a better life for people in China, but also in partnership with the world? The answer is, according to this report, not only yes, but that China is forging new pathways in philanthropy, spearheading innovations in giving, and leveraging cutting-edge technology in ways that are setting the pace in some areas of philanthropy, and also collaborating in new kinds of ways. This could unlock a new generation and a new era of global philanthropy in new kinds of partnerships that could help lift the SDGs. It also shows that China has enormous potential and ambition to scale to address some of the shared challenges of humanity, whether they be in the areas of sustainability, hunger, health, education, or energy poverty. Today, we've assembled an excellent panel to explore the questions, and particularly, can Chinese philanthropy help alleviate global poverty? I want to welcome just a couple people in the audience. Susan Rockefeller, it's so great to have you with us. Also Oscar Tang, trustee of the Asia Society, and one of the leaders in this field himself. Great to have you with us. We are very pleased that the Rockefeller Foundation and AVPN have chosen Asia Society to launch this report. We're a fellow Rockefeller institution created in Asia in the ashes of World War II to pioneer pathways of cooperation, prosperity, and peace building throughout Asia and also between the East and West, particularly to avoid World War III, which is a very worthy goal to have. I'm now going to introduce our panel. Raj Shah. There's a few things you need to know about Raj Shah. Yes, he's had many lofty positions. He's currently president of the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the greatest disruptive creations in modern history. It virtually created the fields of many fields in modern philanthropy, including the whole area of public health, psychiatry, studies in Asia, hospital systems in China. Throughout its history, it's been a great disruptor, and Raj has been president now for 2 years. Yes. Raj was previously head of USAID, appointed by President Barack Obama in 2009. Before that, he was chief scientist and undersecretary for research and economics at the Department of Agriculture. He ran the very innovative agricultural work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He was also an Asia Society Asia 21 leader in his more youthful days.
Thank you.
And a pediatrician by training, and I think still in his heart. But the key, I think, is to know that in every position he's been in, he's been a powerful agent for change, a disruptor for good, a deeply committed and compassionate humanitarian. I've had the privilege of collaborating with him on some major disruptions, and I will say that again at Rockefeller, they're revealing a new strategy. Pay attention, because it's taking all these traditional and powerful areas of work of Rockefeller, from food and nutrition to energy poverty, economic empowerment, and health, and looking at how data can really power those up and leverage them, and also innovative finance. So Raj, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you'll all agree with President Obama, who said whenever he's with Raj, he feels like an underachiever. So Kevin Teo, we just met today. I don't know you, but I like you already.
Thank you.
Kevin's the COO at Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. I've spent some time studying your work and being on your website and seeing what you're doing. It's powerful stuff, and it's needed. You're filling a gap in the market. If you look, they're really focused on new collaborations, new types of innovative convenings, and nurturing what you call a community of champions that can help pave the way, and also helping with the practical learning for governments throughout Asia and policy influencers. Very important work, and I think the study really reflects the kind of focus that you have. He was previously head of East and Southeast Asia at the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship and a Global Leadership Fellow at the WEF. So, thank you. We also have Rujing Gong, who I'm meeting for the first time. Susan Rockefeller says that your friends call you happy, that you're amazing, and just looking at some of your work as co-founder and chair of Happy Life Technology, and Yidu Cloud Technology, and a deeply committed person to social good and philanthropy. She's co-founder of an investment fund that was the lead investor in the healthcare industry, and previously vice president at Deutsche Bank, another underachiever on our panel. And then we have our moderator. So Susan Yuqing Feng will be our moderator today. She's chief New York correspondent for China Business News. She has interviewed many senior business leaders, political leaders from the U.S. and across the globe. She's also the news chief for the English version of China Business News here in the U.S.
Thank you.
And she directed the 2018 documentary World Movers. This morning I received an email from a great mentor to both Raj and me, Strad Masiwa, who's right now on the front lines of the second deadliest storm disaster in southern hemisphere in Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, with over 1.2 million acres of farmland destroyed, hundreds of thousands of cows dead, in addition to being deadly to people and disruptive. He sent me an email quoting former President Ronald Reagan saying, "If not now, when? If not us, who?" I thought that was apropos to your discussion today, because there's a lot of challenges in the world.
Sure.
We're on the record. If you post your comments, please do so under the hashtag China Philanthropy. Hashtag China Philanthropy. I think it is the intention of Rockefeller and AVPN to start a global dialogue on these issues today. So welcome, and thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josette, for your kind introduction. Thank you for everyone to be here. We know, though, that a generation of super rich is emerging in China. According to 2008 Hurun Global List, there are about 819 billionaires in Greater China area, the largest number in the world. And after people making such big fortune, people may feel they are more powerful, they have more responsibility to the world we are living in. So it's natural that Chinese philanthropy is thriving. Here we have the number from Kevin's report that in 2017, the total amount of domestic giving reached to a new high of $23.4 billion. That's a very big number. And at the same time, Chinese corporations invest heavily overseas. and they feel the need to involve at the same time philanthropically in the global world. So today we're very fortunate to have the speakers to talking about the new trends of Chinese philanthropy and its impact to the, to the global development world. So Raj, I have a question for you. When I was very young in China, I know Rockefeller Foundation. I think most of Chinese know Rockefeller Foundation because it has so long history, the engagement in China. So what's the connection between the history and your interest today in China's philanthropy?
Well, thank you, Susan. And let me just start by thanking Josette for that kind introduction for all of us and recognizing her exceptional leadership. She's been an extremely innovative leader on the global stage in so many different roles for such a long time, and it's been work that has helped to lift up poor and vulnerable families from post-disaster settings to every community on the planet, really, and it's extraordinary to get to work with you again, Josette. I think her career is somewhat instructive in terms of answering your question. It's easy for people to believe that the problems we face and the kind of crushing reality of what life is like when you live in extreme deprivation and poverty and vulnerability. It's easy and natural, and it's in fact human nature to believe that that's too difficult a problem for any individual to solve. In fact, I don't think we could get through the day if we didn't have that emotional defense mechanism that allowed us to say solving that kind of a problem or addressing the climate challenges the world faces or dealing with the reality that entire nations have just been wiped out again because of this cyclone, that's someone else's problem to solve. Because who am I to solve it? And, I'm extraordinarily proud to be part of a rich legacy of the Rockefeller family saying, across generations that we've been fortunate and successful. And in fact, it's our responsibility to solve those problems. When the Rockefeller Foundation was created in the United States, there was no income tax, and there was no tax write-off from making the commitments they made to endow the foundation. In fact, at that time, the United States federal government didn't do a whole lot to support poor and vulnerable families here in America. So the idea that America's most fortunate, wealthiest family would endow an institution for the rest of humanity was so novel and so different. There was no USAID, there was no Department of Health and Human Services, there were no feeding programs at home or abroad. It was a breakthrough concept that if you have the good fortune of both having the wealth to make a difference and having the life experience that gives you the confidence that says, hey, I know how to solve problems at scale, whether that problem is figuring out how to get refined oil everywhere, or whether it's thinking about how to save lives for the 6 million children that will die under the age of 5 this year across the planet. It's taking on that responsibility. And I think this report, which we're proud to partner with Kevin and the team to produce, is so important because, as you point out, with more than 800 billionaires, more than $24 billion of giving, this is a good start. But it is just a start. And in the United States, our philanthropic giving is probably north of 400 billion, depending on how you count it. It's not exclusively a task left to billionaire families. It's something that everyone can be a part of. And in a world where so many people should search for and do search for meaning and purpose, the idea that you can be part of a philanthropic movement that is making a big difference is, I think, very, very rewarding to individuals that partake. And I just say one other thought, because it's easy to talk about philanthropy in the context of giving and assume that those numbers are then about charitable activity. And technically they are. But it's very instructive. When the Rockefeller Foundation was created, they had a lot of debate about whether we should do charity or not. And they ultimately concluded that they would leave most charitable immediate giving to meet immediate needs to others, and instead focus on what they called scientific philanthropy. Look out onto the future and say, what are the horizons of science that can actually change the state of humanity for the most people and the most vulnerable people? At the time, the early part of the last century, the answer to that question was medical science, public health science, agricultural science. And over 100 years, they literally changed the world by making those disciplines science-based disciplines. Peking Union Medical College, the university hospital system in China, the China Medical Board. Those are all embodiments of that commitment to using the next frontier of science to lift the most people. And I think we should ask China's leaders and philanthropists today, what is the next frontier of science today that could lift the most people globally? And we should be looking for leaders out of China that can ask and answer that question with the determination and vision that the early Rockefeller family provided in health and agriculture and food.
That's much difficult
in a
than you
different
just
context.
giving.
And
right?
it's much more difficult than giving.
Yeah.
It takes much more patience. Josette earlier this week chaired a meeting of a group called the Alliance for a Green Revolution for Africa. It's about 15 years in. Every day, 15 million farmers wake up in Africa and they get better seeds, fertilizers. They have more science in the production of their agriculture. And we did the math after the meeting. And for those 15 million farm households, they've doubled, tripled, or quadrupled their yields. And we heard passionate stories about how that means girls are now going to school, mothers are able to feed their children, families are able to acquire electricity and improve their housing, and entire communities are moving out of poverty because ultimately of science being applied to their work. Over the last 15 years, I asked the question, well, how much money has the Rockefeller Foundation spent to deliver that result? Because we had a big role to play in creating that program. The answer was $26 per family. And you can give a family $26, and that's going to help. But if you build a coalition, invest hundreds of millions of dollars in science, get public governments to do 2, 3, 4 times as much, stay focused for 15 years, and change the way millions of people go about their most productive activities, you haven't just given them $26, you've given them a pathway to move their entire nation out of poverty.
In other words,
goal.
Maybe you give them not only the money, but you give them the capacity, to change the life.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Kevin, this report I read, it's really amazing. I read this twice. So tell us why your organization want to do this report.
Yeah, I think this, Susan, really comes back to AVPN's mission and what we see as our role within the Asian context. And for everyone in this room, you're following Asia Society's work. You're familiar with the reality of the scale of the region as well as the size of the populations, the diversities of cultures, languages, challenges on the ground, and looking at the SDGs in terms of what are the key issues of the day. These are not simple issues. They are intertwined, they are systemic, and it's very challenging to get anything done on an individual basis and even at a national basis. And the impetus really is around how do you join hands, how do you foster collaboration across the region, how do you do scientific philanthropy, venture philanthropy as we called it, venture philanthropy is in our name. How do we promote more of this mindset so that effective solutions can come about? And what we do at AVPN essentially looks at profiling the social investing landscape of different markets in Asia. We use the term social investing to describe the umbrella set of activities from grant making through impact investing to even sustainable finance or ESG investing, as some markets call it. So in essence, how do you move capital towards impact? And China's a huge place, right? I mean, it's represented is the largest country in the world today in terms of population. Scale of the issues are kind of represented in Asia as well. And we felt that looking at the Chinese market in terms of developments as it relates to wealth creation, as it relates to philanthropic models, and most encouragingly, an openness to collaboration. That's what we felt was key messages that we wanted to put out there. Thanks to Josette and the team for organizing this and helping us host the session, and the Rockefeller Foundation for facilitating our work. By putting out these pieces of research, we seek to have a rallying point, firstly by generating awareness of what is the reality, and then presenting opportunities for not only more stakeholders within that country, but also stakeholders from the outside to join hands into each market, China in this case, to then do more for society and for the world. So that's what motivated us to do this report.
So give us very brief, what's the key findings of the report?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned already, the rate of philanthropy has grown quite substantially from what it was back in 2009, 10 years ago. It's quadrupled to 23 billion today. I think aside from the quantity, the quality of the philanthropy has also shifted quite a bit. And at AVPN, we talk about, quote, traditional philanthropy as something that is donation-oriented. A lot of check writing and not really, having funders go into the root cause of issues. So in Asia, when we started the network, there was a lot of that, and in some parts it still continues. We felt that in the Chinese market, the mindset has started to shift. There is an openness to being strategic, being long-term, being outcomes-focused in terms of what is the quality of grant-making, what is the quality of channeling capital towards all these forms of impact. And that's something I hope comes out as a key message from there. And earlier on, I spoke about this element of collaboration. So not just doing it alone. 9 years ago, when we started the network, there was a lot of individual, very private philanthropy happening. And that mindset has changed as well. It's individuals looking to learn from others. There's been a rapid sort of wealth accumulation cycle, and a lot of wealth has been generated within individuals that are still relatively young. Mm-hmm. And we see this in the tech cohorts. So they're not prepared to just kick back and let the money do the work, but rather to channel their full energy, their full networks to delivering more impact. They're hungry to learn. They're hungry to see what has worked or what has not worked in other markets. So I think that's the other kind of key finding that we kind of uncovered in our conversations with members as well as with stakeholders.
Great. Yeah. So Rujing, you represent the emerging sector of philosophy in China, and you create a foundation to support the nexus between artificial intelligence and healthcare. So tell us the Happy Life technology.
So first of all, I really feel very honored to be here today because healthcare. So the Rockefeller Foundation has helped us to build the best hospital in China over 100 years ago, and also it's been a huge supporter to our hospital system during the past decades. So just being a Chinese, thank you very much. So I was an investor before, and even before being an investor, I wanted to work in the NGO sector, and so I traveled to North Korea, Cuba, Laos, and Ecuador, and Bolivia, and during that process, I realized that giving is actually harder. Giving is actually harder than taking.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Yes. So I gave up that idea and entered investment banking, and because I needed to improve my judgmental skills, and in 2013 I decided I've learned quite a bit in the investing world, and wanted to invest my life in something more meaningful. So I started a company called Happy Life Tech. And I realized being happy, the body and soul, and I'm too young to tackle the problem of soul yet. And so I started Happy Life Tech, and what I believe is a technology-driven green healthcare solution. So between 2013 and 2017, we invested about $150 million with 500 top data scientists in China, creating the largest data operating system that can digest medical data from all different 4,000 manufacturers across China. So now we're in 22 provinces and covering around 300 million people. So on top of our infrastructure, what we do is we help work with hospitals on hospital management and clinical practices, and we work with physicians on research like drug developments, and we also work with pharmaceutical companies on drug developments as well. And because my huge belief is to bring down the research cost for drugs, and by using AI technologies, and also reduce misdiagnosis using our real-world evidence, and helping and also improve real-time monitoring, working with the Ministry of Health and the CFDA. So all those initiatives and all those applications that we're trying to do is only doing only for one objective. That's a cheaper healthcare for everyone, so using AI technology. So that's Happy Life Tech, and I guess that I have a lot to learn from the Rockefellers and many people in this panel. That I don't see that I'm really giving yet, but although I set up a foundation called Smile Children, and with a lot of my personal family wealth, and as well as a large share of our company. So to solve a problem that is not going to be economical for children's rare disease, but very, very key in understanding human body. But the process is just started, and I realized there's going to be a lot of difficulties, not just money, but how to do it the right way, how to keep your value throughout the journey, and how to maintain the best talents, and to help us to solve the very, very difficult and sometimes not very rewarding problems. And so I'm mostly here to learn.
Great. Using AI is already add some value to the foundation, to the philosophy work. It's very new, and people are very glad to see it.
Yes, and the biggest reward of my job is to being able to work with the top physicians and scientists, and really help them during their research and their clinical practices, and making impossible and huge projects less expensive.
Yeah. So Raj, I know you went to China many times. So what do you think China is super rich? How do you compare them with Western counterparts?
Well, on my last trip to China, I had a chance to have a roundtable discussion with leaders in healthcare and met Rujing. And, I asked the question earlier, if 100 years ago you were asking yourself, what's the scientific frontier that would change the world and lift the most people up, the answer was medical science and agricultural science. It seems reasonable to think that the answer to that question today, if you're really looking 20, 30, 40 years out into the future, is data science. And Rujing and her colleagues in that discussion, but I hope everyone really heard what she just said, because I heard 300 million people getting access to healthcare in 22 provinces. And when did you start Happy Life?
2013.
In 9 years. Or I'm sorry, 6 years. In 6 years. And, you know, too much of traditional philanthropy is oriented around reaching, you know, 20,000 people in 10 years. And we need more scale, we need more impact, we need more technology to get there. And I think, I don't know how to answer your question about how wealthy families differ in one place or another. I do know there are people who have the ability to unlock the power of the future, in this case, data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to lift up the most vulnerable. I think I'm sitting next to one right now, and I'm excited because our health leader, Dr. Naveen Rao, is here. His mission is to bring that type of data science to the challenge of community health around the world. And he has prepared a program and modeled this out in just 10 countries. If he can be the bridge that brings Rujing's approach to medical services to communities in India and 9 other countries, most in Africa, we will save 6 million women and children who otherwise will die in childbirth or die under the age of 5. And so I don't know how to answer your question, but I know that we are at our best when we serve as a bridge between those who know how to operate on the ground in communities where there's a lot of suffering and a lot of deprivation, and those who know how to build the tools and technologies that can deliver impact at scale for the future. And so, to me, these two coming together and imagining what's possible is the power of transformation.
So, I think you answered my follow-up question already. So, we know that more than 800 billionaires in China. So this kind of charitable giving, most of the charitable giving from China is still new money. So in your words, I'm guessing this new money is able to work along with old money, like Rockefeller Foundation, to elevate the global poverty.
I helped, I worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation when Bill and Melinda were getting started with their building that institution. And I don't know if I don't know that I'd label things new money and old money and this and that. I will say, to me, the most important thing Bill and Melinda have done has been the time and effort they themselves have put in to bring their unique intellect, their unique set of relationships, their unique credibility to the task of changing the world. And 20 years ago, when we were having the conversations in quiet, small rooms, it was all about learning. It was all about saying, gosh, why do, at the time, 9 million children under the age of 5 die every year? Where are those kids? I don't understand. Why would they have to die when we have all the vaccines right here that our kids get? And the 20-year journey has saved millions of lives. But it wouldn't have happened if Bill and Melinda hadn't sort of made it their mission. And I have the same instinct. I think philanthropy is sometimes overly described by the dollars. It's much more important that Rujing and her colleagues apply their intellect and their vision and their capacity to get things done in partnership with Naveen and his colleagues to actually deliver success. And we have to understand it's going to take decades. But on the other end, the potential for transformational change is extraordinary. When the Rockefeller Foundation started it was called its Mexico Agriculture Program in 1956, they knew that agricultural science would help alleviate poverty and hunger. I don't think they knew that 25, 30 years later, an employee of the Rockefeller Foundation would be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because they literally saved 800 million people from starvation. I don't think they could have known that at the time, but they stuck with it. And in the same way, I think if we build bridges to the leaders who are shaping the future of data, technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and apply it to genuinely end extreme poverty and its consequences, we may be able to look out 10, 15, 20 years from now and say, wow, that actually happened.
Great. So, Rujing, in terms of Chinese philanthropy, that we know that 2008 was a watershed year because the Sichuan Sichuan earthquake, the Wenchuan earthquake, the 8 magnitude earthquake, that it's like so many people start to donate. That year, I have the number here, that the donation come to $16.1 billion. From a year early, it's only around $400 million. So have you feel the culture shift since then?
Not really.
Not really.
I guess that by the way, 2008 I wasn't in China yet, so
Okay.
I think that being around, because my parents are entrepreneurs as well, and so I've always been around entrepreneurs, and I feel that being a Western educated, when I went back to China, I do really respect them, and I think that it's probably before we didn't understand that how much social value they have in their heart, because Chinese, in their generation, they tend to not to talk about it. What they do for their village, and what they do for their employees, and what they do for the community, and what they do for their country. And I've always been taught that way since I was growing up. So they took a lot. They take a lot on, and so I guess that they don't have to do it our way, the Western way or the Eastern way, but I think in their heart, they always had this social value in their heart throughout, the past few decades. I mean, the core entrepreneur and in the core system of China.
Yeah. No, actually, after this Wenchuan earthquake, it's not only entrepreneurs. It's like ordinary people. They're aware of giving, aware of giving can change other people's life. Actually, I do feel some changes since 2008. People actively thinking how to donate. How to help people in emergency, how to help save lives. But when you think of the billionaires, when they make big donation abroad, some Chinese public often will ask, why not giving to domestic institution instead? Like Soho CEO Zhang Xin, she made 2 donations, like one donation around $12 million to Harvard, another one's $10 million to Yale University. And people ask her, why not giving it to China? And another entrepreneur, Zhang Lei, who donate around $8 million to Yale University. And he become famous because of this. And the famous is like people question him, why not giving to Chinese institution? Do you think, is this a concern for Chinese philanthropists when they giving abroad?
I never really thought it that way, because I guess as long as they made their money legally, and they can give their money to whoever, right?
Yes.
So I think it's their rights, right? And I guess that judging someone, I don't know. Like, I never thought it that way. So so it's not my concern, because I don't. As long as I do something that I'm happy with myself, I don't really care what others think. Like, especially if I think that if I'm doing it, that is within the common value, which I uphold. But I do understand that why the general public would have that question.
Yes.
Because there are many problems, and in China, in terms of poverty, and as well as a healthcare system, and and education. So I guess, the public would have a question, say, rather than giving it to Yale, who have billions of dollars on their balance sheet, why not a remote school in Guizhou,
in Sichuan, right?
In Sichuan, right? So I think that people would have their questions, but
that's fun.
Yeah, that's also fine.
Yeah, that's what Zhang Xin said. I just do what I think is valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's their right, right?
Yeah.
People earn their money hard way, and they work hard for their money, and they do whatever they want.
Yeah. So Kevin, what do you think the charitable giving from China, means to the global philanthropy world?
I think what we noticed from the report, and you can see it in the findings, is the large percentage of giving is represented by corporates. And we feel that this is, in fact, early days in terms of what that quality of giving can translate into. Raj, you've talked about sort of different aspects of being strategic and long-term, and we believe that the same can happen within that context. Today, there is sort of, as we did the surveys, there is a profiling of focus areas, and they tend to revolve around education, poverty alleviation, health, and social welfare. And that's all fine in terms of focus areas. The key question is how is the giving or the funding creating broader impact beyond the beneficiary? How are we generating systemic change? And I think sitting right next to Rujing, here's a very good example of someone who claims to not be involved in philanthropy, but your work has fantastic impact, right? And how you present that externally is one thing, but there are resources and there are resource decisions that you make on where all those investments go and what the intended outcome is. And all that's very clear to you. Yeah? I think as it relates to corporate giving, there is the opportunity to be a bit more intentional about how that is channeled. The way Rujing has explained it in terms of how she makes healthcare outcomes more accessible and affordable, right? And whether we call it donations or philanthropy, or whether it's in the form of corporate responsibility or even impact investing, I think those are details. And those are details that tend to morph and change in different parts of Asia just because of structural constraints, right? I mean, in some places, you've got charity laws. In other places, you've got incentives to do, things like mission-related investing. You sort of go with the flow in terms of what is the best way to channel capital for impact. And corporates have tremendous resources at their disposal. And if the mindset can be sort of shifted towards a greater consciousness for impact, then I think that 65%, which is what we came out with in the report, has the potential for substantial impact, not only for China, but as these corporates go overseas, there's the South-South cooperation, Belt and Road. How they take that mindset overseas can also have tremendous impact for all those communities that they touch.
Great. So that in terms of development work, I know that the Chinese government has a One Road, One Belt initiative. That's kind of, you have mixed response. Someone said it's positive, someone says negative. But how about Chinese philanthropy? How about the Chinese charitable giving going abroad? What's the view from the West for that? It's all positive?
I think it's generally, it would be perceived as a positive contribution to help the world achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which China and every other nation on the planet has agreed to as a set of goals that fundamentally speak to whether we can build a future that has less inequity and more opportunity for everyone. So long as the giving is tied to those types of goals and is of a quality where you can understand the results, I think it would be extremely welcome and represents an important part of how we try to build global cooperation to deliver against those objectives.
So what do you think the cultural difference and obstacles that Chinese philanthropists need to be aware when they're going abroad?
Well, when I read the report, and this is, Kevin may want to speak to this too, I don't remember the percentage, but it's a very small percentage of total Chinese philanthropy that's given in traditional grants, right? And a very high percentage that is, it was 1%. I almost couldn't believe that. That's why I didn't want to say the number, because that's really small. And that means 99% is so-called impact investing, right?
I mean, 99% would be in the form of operating foundations.
Or operating
so
foundations, okay. How much is impact investing in general?
That part we didn't characterize.
Is your sense that it's a lot, a little?
I think it's a little at this stage.
Little, yeah. I think there's a huge potential for an ethic around Chinese giving to be tied to impact investing. Mm-hmm. Yes. And my experience could be anecdotal, but when we did some of the roundtables on my last trip to China, a lot of the younger philanthropic leaders were expressing their commitment in the context of impact investing. And I think that's a great thing. I think that's super important. I do think there's a risk that most of what people call impact investing is not really measured. The data around results and impact on inequity kinds of goals is often not, captured and characterized in an effective way. And so if that's going to be a really big part of Chinese philanthropy and the culture of Chinese philanthropy, which I think it is, then I would encourage those families and partners to seek kind of best-in-class partners to do their impact investing in a way that really is about impact. Because some of impact investing is just a label you put on things that are generating market returns and they all sound good, but there's no way of really knowing, is that any different than a traditional commercial investment? Yeah. And some impact investing, and we do some of this through a vehicle we've created at the Rockefeller Foundation called Rockefeller Foundation Impact Investing Management, is designed to actually not achieve commercial rates of return. But in every project we invest in, we are very serious about, are we lifting up those who are poor and vulnerable and giving them greater opportunities? Can we measure that and can we track that in a serious way? So impact investing can mean a lot of things, and I think one of the things I hope to see out of China over time is more giving that's really tied to serious impact and results, that involves investors being able to say, I can take a lower rate of return in order to have social impact, and have it not all just be, branding language on commercial investment.
Kevin, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think to add to Raj's point, the importance of global collaboration, sort of extending your discussion beyond the immediate national context, is important because of that subjectivity, and also to get a sense for what does the rest of the world see about your activity, and then to connect from a language standpoint to how your activity relates to theirs. Impact investing is a great example of this. I mean, if you look at what KKR did in terms of one of their investments in China, where it was a dairy business, and they've since exited that, but they called it an impact investment. The focus back then was to deal with healthcare issues, and there were a lot of health scares at that time, right, around milk and milk safety. And internally in China, as I was talking to colleagues and friends, it wasn't seen as an impact investment, right? It was like, this is milk that's being sold to middle-class families, where is the impact, right? How is the regular family benefiting from all this? So you see two sides of the same coin, and the GIN, which Rockefeller Foundation supported and funded, has gone on this sort of endeavor to clarify what are the characteristics of impact, and one key aspect of that is intentionality. Mm-hmm. What is the intention behind an impact investment, so that we clarify it up front and we state it publicly that this is what we seek to deliver as the outcome. And then after that investment period, do an analysis relating back to the initial intention. And only through that mechanism can you be authentic to what you said was the desired impact.
Yeah, but do you think it's better for that, especially the 60% of donations corporation, do you think it's better for them to cooperate with international foundation to do things together?
I think cooperate from the standpoint of knowledge sharing at a minimum is critical. Whether they co-invest or not, that's the next stage discussion. But to share knowledge and to understand, what is my activity as it relates to impact and how would others perceive it. And this would involve stakeholder engagement, involve engaging with beneficiaries. There's been some work in the Mekong area that local Chinese foundations have pursued as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And those are early days, right? And there's always challenges when you go into new sort of contexts and you engage with unfamiliar communities.
Sure.
But how do you have an openness towards beneficiary, stakeholder engagement, and then frame that into your impact language? I think if they're open to that, then the quality of the engagement would be quite different.
Rujing, my last question is for you. What do you think Chinese philanthropy can offer to the global development work?
I think a lot.
Yes,
Just
definitely.
because, given the size of the population in China, I use healthcare as example. Just the studies that we do on things like rare disease research with many scientists in the country, that alone would contribute just scientifically to the global stage, and also elevating poverty. I think that a lot of my entrepreneur friends would have a lot of very good practical experiences, using their money and as well as efforts and time to help local villages to have a sustainable development in China. That shared experience, I think, will be very useful. And also, I think before we always, talk about philanthropists that in Africa, India, but there also, I sometimes when I come to New York, I feel that maybe, there are people here who that needs, a lot of care and love and mental studies and, so on and so forth, right? Because, I come from, I used to be in a boarding school in England, and it's a small village, and people smile at each other. But every time I come to New York, I get very scared. So I think we need to have a broader mind of, what people actually need, and also, so the Eastern, the practices of Zen and what a happiness is during the Chinese history that with Buddhism and tea ceremony and mind and soul practices and meditation. I think that a lot of my entrepreneur friends would focus on that now, and I think that might be helpful for the U.S. and for very stressful investment bankers. So maybe, I don't know. So I don't want to define. I want to keep an open mind of what philanthropy is, and is the human community that is basically what you have, and you try to help others and living a better life. So it may not just be saving the children in Africa.
Thank you. Now we'll open the question to the floor. Please. Are you waiting for the microphone? Oh, the microphone. Oh, yeah, here, this gentleman.
Do you want some water?
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to save for tea.
Thank you very much, Baldas. This is very fascinating. I learned a lot. I did want to go back to a question that you had posed to the panel. Post the catastrophic event in 2008, when you saw that steep increase, what I would like to know from you is, when I look at the United States, on a per capita basis, as a cultural factor here, perhaps stemming from a Judeo-Christian value system of being your brother's keeper, it has always been a trend across the spectrum. The Rockefellers may come in time, or maybe the Bill and Melinda Gates and many others, but giving was built into this idea at a very localized communitarian level. So going back to your question about this broad-based culture, not of giving, but being your brother's keeper for localized philanthropy, do you see that emerging, which is slightly different from highly concentrated corporate or individual giving that we are focused on? Because the broadest of efforts globally, what we have seen, tends to come from that process where a child breaks a piggy bank and gives $10 to a President Clinton and Bush walking in an Ohio fair about something in Aceh, and she doesn't know where Indonesia is, but knows people are suffering, and said, here's $10 from my piggy bank. I'm curious, because it was a point you raised. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Taking several questions first, or do
Maybe.
how would you like to do this?
Could you? I think maybe ask
Just
one. Yeah, just one by one.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will entail a mindset shift in terms of having that broader worldview and perspective. As it relates to locally focused, I guess in the US we call it place-based giving. I think that has been in Asia quite a bit, and for a while we characterized that as traditional philanthropy, because in AVPN's earlier days we were promoting venture philanthropy, which is bigger bets, systemic change, and kind of clearer long-term outcomes. But I think there is a space for both, actually. And in fact, if you merge the principles and the mindset behind venture philanthropy into place-based giving, and to have the perspective that is beyond helping the beneficiary, but then thinking about what is the broader root cause to why this person is in that situation, then I think that's where the true value of the capital can come about. Because, I guess Einstein once said that you can't solve a problem using the same methods that created it, right? So you have to support entrepreneurs, you have to support social innovation, you have to come up with different methods and interventions to fundamentally change the structure of that issue. And I think that's where, if we have this mindset of looking at the local and kind of what is my place to address that issue, but think about what is the broader implication to getting a little bit deeper, then that's where I feel the value could be. And it'll take some time. It'll take some time.
Yeah, the gentleman.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for your very insightful data about the work that you're doing. My name is Jean-Paul. I'm originally from Haiti, and I created one of the most exciting projects to eradicate dental disease around the world, which is one of the most overlooked health problems in the world. And I have two-part questions. I think there
one
are currently
person, one question.
There are 2.5 billion
short.
people who are affected by oral disease. And I think, what about investing in programs? If we know we can eradicate those diseases, why not start with the ones that can be prevented to begin with? And also, there's a lot of young people who are currently working on solving those problems. Why not investing in them to be able to help them solve those problems?
Raj, would you like to take that?
I think we are certainly at Rockefeller and in the global health field in general. I think there's an awareness of what the next horizon of preventable burden of disease is, and more resources should, in fact, in my view, kind of migrate to those topics in those areas. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, I think, does an excellent job of publishing, together with the World Health Organization, of course, what those areas are. In terms of young people, it is super important to get young people involved in this. I ran USAID for a number of years, and I got the strongest reception. It would shock. We'd go with members of Congress from South Carolina or Georgia or Mississippi, and I'd take a senator who served for 20, 30 years, and we'd go to the Mississippi State University or Clemson, and they would see 800 college students show up to talk about global health, or because they wanted to learn about how to end energy poverty around the world. And I think you're onto something, that there's a global ethic and a global desire to serve that is deeply tied to next generation leaders, and we should all do more to kind of unlock that. One of the most successful things the Rockefeller Foundation has done over its very long history is support leaders. Famously, they have Rockefeller-funded PhD scientists all over the world that are known as Rocky Docs. And we run into those Rocky Docs in every cabinet room and every boardroom and every scientific conference around the planet. It's the most amazing investment of human capital that continues to pay dividends. So I'd encourage that also to be part of the new ethic of Chinese philanthropy.
Yeah, we'll open the question to the back.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dinda Elliott with the China Institute. And firstly, thank you so much for this research that you've done and for raising awareness of the very inspiring and important emergence of Chinese philanthropy. The question I have, we at the China Institute, we have a U.S.-China Next Generation Philanthropy Dialogue where we bring together young Chinese and American philanthropists, and we also have found that there's a particular interest in impact investing and that kind of thing. So what I wonder is if you could all talk a little bit about why that is. What are the particular challenges in China in terms of traditional philanthropy? Are there, incentives that exist in the States that don't exist there, et cetera, that lead Chinese to focus more on the impact investing side of things? Thanks.
Who wants to take that question?
I can take it.
Yeah.
I think impact investing is something that, from a conceptual standpoint, connects really well to business entrepreneurs. And that's a lot of where that wealth was created. Yeah? So if you look at the whole wealth accumulation cycle, it's entrepreneurs that benefited from FDI flows, and then what makes most sense for them to channel their resources towards impact. I think from an impact investing perspective, that connection is a lot closer than picking up a whole new field of philanthropy, which is strange and alien, and is the realm of activists, and that's where they're going to get attacked because they're ignorant in that space. So I think it is a compelling proposition for entrepreneurs that have accumulated wealth to go down that route. And as it relates to opportunities for making the impact investments more impactful, is it impact washing or is it sort of intentional in terms of the outcomes? I think that's where the dialogue piece is critical, and it's great that you're doing this in terms of the exchange from China to the US, because once we plug them into that bigger frame, that bigger mindset, and a bigger perspective on issues and how organizations come to terms with impact management, I think that is the input that they can benefit from in terms of taking this back to China and then expressing it locally in a way that's relevant.
Please.
Hi, thank you very much for a great panel. I'm Joan Kaufman from the Schwartzman Scholars Program, and a Rocky Doc myself.
Wow.
I spent many years with the Ford Foundation in China in a much earlier phase, before there was really the growth of Chinese philanthropy. And from the perspective of sort of the global foundations and knowledge sharing, there are really strict lines in China about, what's okay to work on politically. And I think a question that I always have is, as the Chinese ecosystem for philanthropy has developed and become, in many ways, self-sufficient, I would say, there isn't the need for the, the traditional sort of global philanthropy actors in the same way in China anymore. Will that ecosystem and the lines for what's acceptable to work on and not acceptable to work on really change the, kind of the future kind of possibilities for more social justice oriented philanthropy that have driven many issues globally for Rockefeller, for Ford, and others, looking at the important role of rights and the social determinants of health and other aspects of kind of global equality that I think have been fundamental to the philanthropy field. So it's just a question and something I wonder about and would be interesting to hear your views on that. And I think there's plenty one can do without even getting into those areas. There's a lot of impact to be made, especially in the technical areas related to the Sustainable Development Goals. That in and of itself would represent huge progress and contribution. But there are the other dimensions, and I'm interested to hear your views on that.
I think this connects to the earlier question to some extent, and I didn't want to go into sort of the politics of what's acceptable to do and what's not. From a philanthropic standpoint, the rules are the rules, and I think that's why I feel if the rules make it challenging or difficult to engage in a lot of these rights-based sort of advocacy work, then how do we explore other avenues of arriving at a similar set of outcomes that wouldn't have as many impediments? And that's why I feel impact investing is perhaps a channel that can embrace those same set of objectives. You can sort of take on what are the elements of responsible business, what are the elements of responsible corporate engagement on a broader context. And that's why the exchange is important, because that's where normative alignments come about. So if that's happening, then you could gradually arrive at a similar set of outcomes. And then sort of how social justice and rights-based policies adapt over time, that's going to be its own evolution. And hopefully the two sort of converge in a meaningful way.
Raj, what's your view on this?
Well, I think that's a super important question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think it would be easy to ask and address that question in the context of China alone, but I also think it's important to think about in the context of just philanthropy everywhere. And the reality is we live in a new Gilded Age with a level of inequality that we haven't seen since the first one. Some would argue statistically we've exceeded the standards of inequality that led to, in America at least, kind of 20 years of policy and political evolution that ultimately resulted in a New Deal and a different approach towards public responsibility for those who are vulnerable. And I think one of the big questions for philanthropy at home and around the world, and I think this is relevant to China but not exclusively to China, is, is philanthropy willing to take on tough issues and call for and work towards real aggressive policy change? Or is philanthropy about doing kind of good charitable work within the rule structure that exists? In our 100-plus year history, I'd argue the most powerful points of impact, the creation of the Social Security Commission and then advocacy work that led to Social Security being law of the land in the United States, some of the efforts we made to support the evolution of science over a very long period of time, some of the more recent efforts to campaign for and support American workers, recognizing the sort of deterioration of opportunity and equity in this country for America's workers, represent efforts to change policy aggressively. And I think more philanthropy in this country needs to be serious about understanding that governance and policy is a lever of transformation. And I don't know enough about China's internal governance workings to be able to comment, but it strikes me that as difficult as it is to imagine, if we saw Chinese leaders and philanthropists stand up and demand over time real policy transformation that expands equity and justice in that context, that would be a major contribution of civic leadership as well.
It truly is. I really think Rockefeller Foundation set a very, very high standard for global philanthropic work. You know, that's great. Okay, then, yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting panel. My name is Josephine Lau. I work for a philanthropist based in China, and we give away money to causes in global health. So our foundation has made donations globally, including to organizations like UNICEF. So I was especially interested in what the report said and what the panel has discussed about how Chinese corporates are increasingly engaging in philanthropic work globally as well as they expand their international presence. So I was wondering if you guys can speak a bit to, are there certain challenges to Chinese corporate philanthropic giving overseas as the environment is tightening for Chinese corporates within the context of the trade war, and if there are any opportunities where Chinese companies might be able to especially make an impact overseas, especially within the current environment. Thank you.
Rujing, would you like to take the question?
I actually find it quite opposite way because we as a corporate we do a lot of support for scientific research. So we try to work recently. Last year, we tried to work with universities in the U.S. Just because the money is from China, and some of the scientists that we worked with find it quite hard to receive the money because they might have to go through a special checks through the international corporate affairs department or the compliance departments, and because of the U.S. and China relations. Yeah, so I guess I don't find it hard in China that establishing those multi-center research, but I think that in the U.S. there's some sort of sensitivity of receiving money from China. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Peggy Blumenthal from the Institute of International Education. And I wanted to build a little bit on your comments and also ask Raj about this, because the importance that the Rockefeller Foundation placed on global science collaboration, and now there is a growing concern about whether Chinese scientists or Chinese American scientists should be viewed with some suspicion. And I wonder what you see as the possible role of foundations that are very widely respected in addressing this kind of suspicion that is going to put a damper on international scientific collaboration.
Well, I can start. I certainly think it's absolutely the role of civic society and philanthropic institutions to build those bridges. And to the extent you're talking about communities like scientists that are, have an ethic and a work environment that is different from government policymakers, that's precisely where philanthropy can thrive. So I know you know this, of course, but we're deeply committed to that. We do that not just with China, but all around the world. And we do it on issues related to food, health, power and electricity, workforce and jobs, climate, resilience, building networks of like-minded people who can learn from each other and be sustained by each other, especially outside of the government-to-government track of engagement. It has always been a critical element of our philanthropy, and I think will only be more important in the future.
Maureen Reardon, Cardinal Points Place, a project. Thank you for being here today. As new models of engagement emerge to that can be locally adaptable as they emerge to possibly connect with nonprofits that have broken relationships with their client base? Do you see art and creativity as a vehicle for change to reconnect communities with the institutions that you support?
Do you want? I mean, I can try to answer that. I do. I want to give a lot of credit to our colleagues crosstown at the Ford Foundation. They just, I think, restructured their building and have made art a major programmatic example, both for their physical space there and in their new programming going forward along those lines. But we have had, at Rockefeller, over time, we've had different levels of support for art in that context, but yes.
But more about the support, but even in China. What is, how powerful is art and creativity viewed as a channel of development?
I will defer to others on that.
Yeah. I'd say based on what we found, it wasn't a significant development at this stage, and something that we will look into. We have embarked on some creative economies research work with the British Council, starting off in Indonesia, so we haven't gone to China. But that's our own journey in terms of understanding this space from an AVPN perspective a little bit more, and would be happy to come back and report back to everyone as we see that expanding beyond our Indonesia work.
Thanks for the interesting discussion. My name is Stephanie Ma from Xinhua News Agency. Would you please elaborate more on how those advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning actually help to improve the efficiency of philanthropy in China in terms of either donation or the outcomes of a project? And would you please talk about your experiences in actual practice? Thank you.
Okay. So I can give you a very, very a small application that we do. So just with the clinical decision support system that we build on top of our data infrastructure within a particular hospital, the general practitioner may not have the expertise in many different fields, and a junior practitioner can also access that decision support system based on real world data, and that would significantly reduce misdiagnosis at the entry level. So a lot of physicians would find that very, very helpful. So that's one example. I can give it to you. And the second one is what we do for research. We've already published 40 top science journals, like in Nature and Science, and that volume of international research paper being published in China on one infrastructure hasn't happened before. That's partially because our AI system with our data technologies can help the scientists to quickly validate their hypothesis using our simulation model and without a lot of cost. So that's why what I said, we are trying to tackle two biggest problems in healthcare. One is the cost of research. That includes drugs developments and the clinical practices. And the second one is misdiagnosis. And those two already reduce a huge portion of the public healthcare spending. And so my belief is to bring down the cost for the same quality, and not necessarily pushing the government to spend more.
Rujing, do you have any idea, any thoughts on that?
Well, our work is less focused on service in China, but we have a large number of examples. I'll just give you one where we are trying to reach 25 million Indians who live without access to electricity, and a group of researchers and data scientists led by a gentleman named Jay Tanuja at the University of Massachusetts have developed artificial intelligence algorithms that allow you to predict which, amongst a population of people with no electricity, which families are likely to both demand electricity and pay for it, and then be what we call a power user, have a steep consumption growth. And if you can look at a poor village in rural Bihar and know which household is likely to be a demand driver, that then creates a market for the companies we support with investment that are trying to sell off-grid renewable solar power into those communities. And that's, I think, a very concrete and specific example of something you cannot do without machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I think personally it has the power to unlock solutions that will end energy poverty for 800-900 million people around the world.
Maybe I'll just quickly add on the philanthropy piece, because you asked about that. I don't think it, this example doesn't connect to the AI aspect, but it looks at fintech. And in China, WeChat is a massive platform that not only facilitates messaging, but also a lot of payments, right? In fact, you go to the marketplace and you have a stall holder there that can interact with you using WeChat. And they've very successfully used WeChat to do online fundraising on a broad basis. And I think if the platform could be enhanced to then inculcate this mindset of being outcomes focused, right? Like what did the funds that you raised for this particular kind of social organization translate to in terms of outcomes? Then there is very broad reach in terms of shifting the societal mindset to become outcome driven. So outcomes is not just contained within the realms of foundations or grant makers, but it then pervades through society, and I think that could have quite transformational impact.
That's great. I think time is up. Let's give our speaker a round of applause.
Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Absolutely.
So if I could just close with a couple of quick thoughts. We always promise to get you out in time. I want to thank AVPN and Rockefeller Foundation and the great panelists. I will just say just a couple reflections. This is a profoundly important discussion. It reminds me both of John D. Rockefeller, the founder of the Rockefeller Foundation's journey, which went from good neighbor giving, which you were talking about earlier, and which I think is profoundly present in China. From my experience, when someone needs and a neighbor needs, that happens, and it's deeply in the religious traditions, certainly of the East and the West, to a more systematic giving. And that was really, as Raj talked about the science and putting that behind that, I think with the $7 trillion gap to reach the SDGs, China coming on board in a more systematic way will be very powerful. And I'm glad Rockefeller is on this possibility of a new divide happening in the world, what I call data poverty, where if we don't leverage data for those most challenged, and the fact that you are getting data and using it for rare diseases for children is not easy. We have whole universities in the U.S. who cannot get access to data because it's owned by private companies or others. So, very big issue that was raised here. I just want to say, on a personal level, the way China does business matters, and sourcing. So, for example, when Unilever decided to sustainably source palm oil, that changed the world. And when you look at companies like Vanke, good friends of some of ours, and Wangshu, who, after the Sichuan earthquake, changed the way they did sourcing. Yeah. This was huge, right? Yes. And that impact could be felt around the world if China does business, because China is now big and it makes a difference. And also business models matter in China. And Jack Ma's, discovery that you couldn't get access to small loans in China has revolutionized the lives of thousands. So I think incorporating in that discussion, as many have asked here. I just want to end with a story that I remember very often because it was so moving to me. I was in Rwanda in 2008, and on the steppe farmers there who were very poor, and one of the women farmers said, you know, can I ask you something? I was heading the World Food Program, and she pulled a picture out of her dress that she carried every day as inspiration, and it was a picture of steppe farmers in Yunnan, China. The difference was the yields. And she was trembling, and she said, could you introduce me to these farmers? I need to learn from them. And I thought, oh my God, this is really going to open a new world.
It is.
Where China's learnings coming out of poverty are going to be very relevant to the world. So just my closing thought on this is profoundly important that we see China not only growing and ending poverty for itself, but playing a role in the world on the bigger picture. And so thank you for bringing that to all of our attention, and thank you all for coming out at 8:30 in the morning.